Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kay Castillo. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Residents in Long-Term Care, and we're so excited to have you all join us today for our webinar, Navigating Long-Term Care, Essential Legal and Financial Considerations. I wanted to do just a quick little overview of who Friends of Residents is in case this is your first time joining us, or someone else forwarded you the invite to join us today. But we are a 501c3 representing the voices of residents and families. We educate, advocate, and support residents in long-term care and their families. And we do that a number of different ways. We have a hotline and an email address that folks can call and get, we have any kind of questions they have about navigating long-term care or what to do in certain situations. We try to support residents and their family members. We often get calls from caregivers as well. And then we support or we educate. We try to do educational webinars such as this today, other community events so that folks can learn about Friends of Residents. And then we also advocate. So we have an arm where we lobby state legislators and work with state leaders to bring the voices of residents in long-term care to the table. So that's just a quick snapshot of who we are. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Dorian Sylvester. She is the Executive Director of Guidance Carolina and joined the team in May of 2014. Dorian ensures all operations within the organization are consistent with Guidance Carolina's values, missions, goals, and policies. Dorian received a BA in political science and a post-baccalaureate certificate in gerontology from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Dorian earned her Master of Social Work with a concentration in aging from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She has a background in geriatric mental health and community-based social work practice with older adults. She has also served as an adjunct instructor teaching elder law at Guilford Technical Community College and at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro teaching social services for the aging. Prior to Guidance Carolina, Dorian served for 11 years as a long-term care program manager and senior regional long-term care ombudsman at the Piedmont Triad Regional Council Area Agency on Aging. Dorian is active in numerous local, state, and national advocacy organizations, including us with Friends of Residents in Long-Term Care. She's a passionate advocate for elder justice and is a champion for the rights of older adults and individuals with disabilities, especially those who are vulnerable or who have been victimized. So please welcome Dorian with our presentation today. We're so excited. And if you all have questions, she did try to incorporate any questions that you all submitted in advance, but if you have questions as she's going along, please put those in the chat. We're going to collect all of the questions and we'll do a follow-up email just in case we don't get to them. So if you've got a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll answer it afterwards. All right.
Thanks, Kay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am excited to be here with you this afternoon, and I appreciate the introduction from Kay. You probably heard in my bio that I am a social worker by education. So I wanted to start this presentation with a disclaimer that I am not an attorney. I am not a financial professional, so nothing in this presentation should be considered legal or financial advice. That said, I have been working in and around long-term care for more than 20 years. So this presentation is to share my experience and perspective in long-term care, both as an ombudsman for many years. And for those of you who are not familiar with the ombudsman program, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And as the director of a nonprofit organization that serves clients who are living in long-term care. Hang on. There we go. So I want to tell you just a little bit about the organization that I'm with. Guidance Carolina is also a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to provide person-centered decision-making support for older adults and individuals with disabilities. And we do that through serving in legal roles on their behalf. We serve as guardian, both of the person and of the estate. We administer special needs trusts for individuals with disabilities. We serve as agent under power of attorney, both healthcare and financial. We serve as representative payee of Social Security benefits. And we offer care management services for victims of elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So a variety of decision-making supports targeted at individuals who, for a variety of reasons, don't have a family member, any natural supports who can serve in these roles on their behalf. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these legal roles a little later on in the presentation. But that's us in a nutshell, and you're welcome to come to our website to learn more about who we are and what we do. For today's presentation, we're going to talk about, what are we talking about when we say long-term care? That's sort of a big nebulous topic. So we're going to talk about what we mean when we say long-term care. We're going to talk about the cost of long-term care, how it's paid for, and how you would budget for it. What does insurance cover when you're contemplating long-term care? Medicare, public benefits, what help can you get in paying for long-term care expenses? And then we're going to pivot and talk about some key legal considerations when you're planning for long-term care. What legal documents do you want to make sure you have in place in order to have as much autonomy as possible over your care? And then we'll wrap up with some questions and answers. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. You submitted some excellent questions. And as Kay mentioned, this is a lot to cover in 1 hour. I'm going to try to save time for questions at the end. However, if we don't get there, if you'll put your questions in the chat, Kay is going to keep up with them and we will send a follow-up. All right, without further ado, let's get started in talking about what do we mean when we even say long-term care. It refers to a whole range of services that are targeted towards somebody who needs assistance with their activities of daily living. It can be a little bit of assistance, or it can be somebody who needs care with all of their activities of daily living. It's typically for folks who have a disability or who have a chronic illness and for whatever reason are not able to meet all of their own care needs, and they need some support. Long-term care can be provided in a variety of settings. First and foremost, in an individual's private home. And when you talk to folks, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, I would prefer to have care provided in my own home. You don't often hear them say, I'd like to go to a nursing facility. Usually folks prefer to be at home. There's also adult daycare, which is a daytime option, a center where individuals who need long-term care can go during the day and then they come back to their private home at night. And then there's residential long-term care, and that's really what I'm going to be focusing on the most for the purposes of this presentation. But I wanted to make it clear that when we use the term long-term care, it is much broader than just residential long-term care. So we're going to be covering assisted living and nursing home care. Assisted living is targeted at folks who need just that, some assistance. They don't necessarily need hands-on medical care provided by a nurse on a daily basis, but maybe they need help preparing meals. Maybe they need help taking a bath. So some assistance with their daily living. And then a nursing home is the highest level of care. And this is your most medically fragile individuals who need that highest level of skilled nursing care that's overseen by a doctor and has nurses on staff providing that care. Okay, so that's just a quick snapshot of sort of what we're talking about when we talk about long-term care. Now let's talk about who needs long-term care. and really all of us, right? The chance that any one of us who are on this call today, if we haven't already, we have the potential to need long-term care at some point in our lives. Statistically speaking, most of us are going to require some form of long-term care. 7 out of 10 people. The longer you live, the higher the percentage is that you're going to need some long-term care. If you're over 65, 70% of the population will need long-term care at some point. So this is an important conversation to have, because most of us are going to have to encounter long-term care, whether it's for ourselves or navigating it on behalf of a loved one at some point in our lives. So the first part of this presentation, we're talking about both financial and legal considerations. The first part is the financial. How much does long-term care cost and who pays for it? There's a variety of ways to pay for long-term care. You can pay for it privately, which is money out of your own pocket. It can be your income, it can be your savings. Perhaps you have investment accounts. Maybe you sell property and use the proceeds from that property to pay for care. It's using your own assets and your own income to pay for it out of pocket. There is some insurance coverage for long-term care. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then there are some public programs for folks that can't afford it that help cover the cost of long-term care. But regardless of who's paying, the underlying theme of this is it is expensive. Healthcare in the United States is expensive, and long-term care is certainly no exception to that rule. So we're going to talk about just how expensive right now. So as I mentioned, if you're paying privately out of pocket, folks use a whole variety of resources and assets to pay for their care. You could even potentially use the equity in your home or reverse mortgage to cover the cost of care. So if you were to pay privately in North Carolina in 2025 for in-home care, you're looking at about $5,339 a month on average. We have a number of clients that are receiving in-home care, and the going rate ranges from about $30 to $35 an hour for in-home care. And that's typically what's known as custodial care. So things like housekeeping, companionship, preparing meals. It does not typically include hands-on nursing care. So if you need hands-on nursing care and you're going to pay for that privately, then the hourly rate goes up dramatically. So on average, you're looking at, between $5,000 to $6,000 a month to pay for a caregiver to come into your home. If you need to go to an assisted living, if you need additional support and are no longer able to stay in your home, you're looking at between $5,000 and $6,000 a month on average in North Carolina. And I say on average because that number can go up dramatically. We have clients who are in assisted living that pay $10,000, $11,000 a month for their assisted living care. But you usually $5,000 is generally the starting point by and large. And then the highest level of care, nursing home care, if you want to share a room and pay privately, you're looking at $8,000 to $9,000 a month. If you want a private room, it's upwards of $9,000, $10,000 on up. So it's expensive, right? Remember? This data comes from Genworth, who does a cost of care survey every year. And if you want to go to their website, they have a really interesting tool where you can project out the cost of care in the future. Because, long-term care, it's going to go up every year, just like everything else with inflation. So I did just a quick look at 10 years from now, 2035. What are we looking at 10 years from now in terms of these average costs? And these numbers are national numbers. I didn't look specific to North Carolina. But for in-home care and assisted living, And 10 years from now, that monthly cost goes on average goes up to around $8,000 a month. And for a nursing home, 10 years from now, you're looking at $14,000 on up per month. So it's expensive to pay privately. So what about Medicare? I've gotten this question a lot over the years. Medicare is the federal health insurance program for people over the age of 65 or people with disabilities. Part A covers your inpatient care. Part B is your outpatient care. Part C is you opt out and can get a plan that covers both. And then Part D is your prescription drugs. And a lot of folks, assume you have insurance, it's Medicare, so it stands to reason that Medicare would pay for your long-term care needs. In fact, more than half of Americans in a 2023 study believed that Medicare would cover their long-term care needs. And so they really didn't ponder these conversations that we're having because you just make an assumption that Medicare is going to pay for it. Unfortunately, this is a misconception, and it causes a lot of people not to do some essential planning. Medicare is very limited in what it will pay for. It doesn't pay anything for long-term custodial care. So having a caregiver who comes into your home and helps you prepare meals, helps you with mobility. Perhaps you need a walker and you need someone to help you with mobility in your home. Medicare will not pay for that. Medicare also does not pay for assisted living, which tends to be a big surprise for a lot of folks. If you need assisted living and you can't afford to pay privately, Medicare is not an option. So we've talked about what Medicare does not cover. What does it cover? It does cover a little bit of long-term care cost, primarily nursing home care, but even that has some limitations around it. So your Medicare Part A, your inpatient coverage, will pay towards nursing home care under very specific parameters. You have to have been in the hospital for 3 consecutive days. And then within 30 days of those 3 consecutive days, you have to be admitted to a Medicare certified nursing facility. Most of them are Medicare certified, but not all of them. So that's an important distinction. So you've been in the hospital for 3 days, you're discharged from the hospital, you go to a Medicare certified nursing facility. You have to need skilled services such as physical therapy, speech therapy. Maybe you're recovering from a fall, a broken hip, wound care, a service that is deemed skilled by Medicare that requires a nurse to oversee the provision of that service. So you meet that criteria. If you meet all of those conditions, Medicare will pay 100% of your stay in the nursing home for 20 days. Once the clock turns to day 21, then you have a copay. And right now that copay is $209.50 per day. And then Medicare will pay for your care above and beyond that daily copay. But $209 a day, that's substantial for a lot of folks. And so, you always joke in nursing homes when day 21 comes around, you see folks packing their bags and are ready to go home because that copay kicks in. And if you don't have another payer source to cover that copay and you can't afford to pay for it out of pocket, then a lot of folks go home on day 21, whether or not they've received all the care that they feel they need. And then once you've been in the nursing home for 100 days, you're fully responsible for the entire cost of your care unless you have another payer source. So, you'll see Medicare is even quite limited in what they will cover for even nursing home care. So who else pays for long-term care? If you don't have $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 a month to pay privately, and Medicare is limited in what they'll pay, Who else pays for long-term care? Long-term care insurance is one option that will help cover long-term care expenses. Excuse me. The premiums, it ranges. There's a lot of variance in long-term care insurance products. The average annual cost is about $3,000, but it depends a lot on your age when you purchase the policy, your gender, your health, where you live. The cost of long-term care varies quite a bit depending on where you live in the country or even where you live in the states. And then the coverage varies. Some policies operate on a reimbursement model that'll pay for very specific expenses that are detailed in the policy. Others will provide a fixed cash amount per day. And they can be time limited. So some policies they'll pay for up to 2 years. And then if you need care longer than 2 years, then your insurance is exhausted and you have to look to another source. Others will pay indefinitely. We have a client that has a long-term care policy that provides $350 a day indefinitely. We always joke that he's got one of the Cadillac of long-term care insurance policies because it's very generous. So it depends, but it certainly does help offset those large costs for folks who have a policy. The key for long-term care insurance, it's just like any other insurance product, is it's much more affordable if you buy it before you need it. You don't buy homeowners insurance after your house burned down. It's the same concept with long-term care insurance. The ideal time to buy it is when you're healthy, when you're in your younger years, ages 50 to 60, and the underwriting is more favorable. That's when it tends to be more affordable. If you wait longer, it's not impossible to get a policy if you're older or if you have some pre-existing health issues, but it becomes more expensive. And the longer you wait, the higher the need is that you might have long-term care. It becomes cost prohibitive if there's even a plan available. So long-term care insurance is a good option if you plan ahead. So what else? What about veterans? Can veterans get any help? There is a program through the VA called Aid in Attendance. And this program offers some financial support for qualified veterans to pay for long-term care. It's added on to the VA pension. So you have to qualify for the VA pension. It's not a standalone benefit. And it's designed to offset the cost of care. It does not cover the whole cost of care. So a veteran or their spouse potentially could qualify for this benefit. The veteran had to have served at least 90 days of active duty, and 1 day had to have been during wartime period. It doesn't necessarily have to have been combat, but it has to be during a wartime period. And the veteran could not have had a dishonorable discharge. You also have to meet some criteria. You have to need assistance with a certain number of activities of daily living. And you have to meet some income criteria. The income has to be beneath the VA's maximum annual pension rate. And you have to have a net worth less than $155,000 as of this year. So there's some criteria in there, but for the group of veterans who meet that criteria and their surviving spouses, this is a benefit that could be helpful, particularly if you're looking at paying for in-home care or assisted living. Because nursing home care is so expensive, chances are the aid and attendance benefit is not going to be that helpful, because most of the time, if you meet the income threshold to qualify for aid and attendance, you also meet the income threshold for Medicaid. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But for assisted living or in-home care, this benefit can be quite helpful. So what about Medicaid? What does Medicaid pay for? Medicaid is a state and federally funded program, and it provides health coverage for low-income individuals. There's lots and lots of different Medicaid programs. There's community-based Medicaid for older adults, people with disabilities. There's multiple waiver programs out there. The Medicaid that we're talking about is Medicaid for long-term care, specifically Medicaid for a nursing home. So Medicaid is not available to everybody. It has some eligibility criteria that you have to meet in order to qualify for it. It's based on your income and it's based on your assets. In North Carolina in 2025, in order to qualify for Medicaid for a nursing home, your income has to be less than the Medicaid rate for nursing home care. So that's between $8,000 and $11,000 a year. Most people meet this criteria. You don't, at least in my experience, I don't encounter very many people whose monthly income is above $8,000 a month. There's some, but most people meet the income criteria for Medicaid at the nursing home level of care. Where it gets tricky is that there is also an assets test. In order to qualify for Medicaid at the nursing home level of care, if you're single, you can't have more than $2,000 in savings or in assets in the bank. And for a married couple, $3,000. So that's a very small amount. So if you're somebody who has a modest savings, $50,000, $100,000, and you meet the income threshold, you won't qualify because your assets are above the asset limit. And that gets problematic for folks who, you've saved your whole life, you have $50,000, $100,000. But when we looked at the out-of-pocket cost for nursing home care, that will be gone very, very quickly. So what does Medicaid pay for? Medicaid is the largest public payer of long-term care in the United States. We spend billions of dollars on Medicaid for long-term care because it is so costly. Over 50% of all nursing home costs in the United States are covered by Medicaid. Medicaid will pay for what they deem medically necessary care. And so they're looking for the least costly setting. Medicaid does not typically factor in personal preferences. So, not all facilities will accept Medicaid. So you may not have your choice of which nursing facility you would like to go to. Medicaid does not typically pay for a private room, which in my personal opinion would be the worst thing to have to encounter, is sharing a very small room at the end of your life when you have health issues. But Medicaid will only pay for a semi-private room. And then again, we're talking about Medicaid at the nursing home level of care. There is a specific Medicaid program that we don't have time to go into great detail about, but I did want to point out the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly. It's known as a PACE program. And this is a Medicare Medicaid program that you can opt into if you're nursing home eligible and Medicaid eligible, but you wish to remain living at home. So I wanted to throw that in there really just as some food for thought. Because it's another option for how you cover the cost of long-term care if you meet the criteria. So that's the criteria for Medicaid at the nursing home level of care. What about assisted living? Remember, we said that assisted living is not covered at all by Medicare. So if you need assisted living and you cannot afford to pay for it privately, there is a program, it's a state-specific program called Special Assistance, that helps offset the cost of assisted living care for individuals who meet that income and asset test. The income and asset tests are different for special assistance than they are Medicaid for a nursing home. You'll notice they are significantly lower. So in North Carolina, in 2025, in order to qualify for special assistance for an assisted living, you can't make more than $1,448.50 per month. If you need a memory care unit, which is it's also known as a special care unit, it's a locked unit specifically for people with dementia, that income cap is a little bit higher. It's $1,832 per month. And then the same assets test applies. You can't have more than $2,000 in the bank in order to qualify for special assistance. So you'll notice it's quite a bit more difficult to qualify for special assistance from an income perspective than it is for nursing home care. And this creates some real barriers to care for folks. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. So let's say you have that modest little nest egg, and you're learning about this and you think, gosh, I don't have enough to pay privately. I don't have long-term care insurance. I don't qualify for any veterans benefits, but I don't want to spend my modest nest egg on long-term care. Should I just give all my money away? Give it to my grandchildren. They're going to get it one day anyway. I'll just give all my money away and then I'll move into the assisted living or I'll move to the nursing home. Unfortunately, the law prevents you from doing that without getting penalized. You can do that, certainly. But North Carolina has a look back period. For Medicaid at the nursing home level of care, it's 60 months. And for special assistance at the assisted living level of care, it's 36 months. So when you apply for benefits, Medicaid or special assistance, they're going to apply that look back period. And if you transferred any assets that weren't sold for fair market value, or you gift your nest egg to your grandchildren, you're going to get penalized. They apply a formula that depends on how long you're going to get penalized, where you have to pay privately for your care until you've reached the end of your penalty period. So in essence, you really, if you've given away that 50,000, then you're going to need that 50,000 back in order to pay privately for your care during that penalty period. Now there's some side doors around the penalty period, and I'll mention those a little bit later on, but by and large, you can't give your money away. There's no way to hide from this look back period. And it's gotten much more restrictive as years have gone on because people found ways around the look back period. But unfortunately, you can't give your money away just for the purpose of applying for Medicaid or applying for special assistance. Okay, so that we've covered the financial considerations that you want to think about when you're planning for long-term care or working with a family member or a client who needs long-term care. Bottom line, like I said at the beginning, it is very expensive. And so the earlier that you start planning for it, the more options you have available to you. But now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the legal considerations that you want to keep in mind when you're considering long-term care. So what are some key documents that you want to make sure you have in place? And these are important documents to have in place at any age. So you don't want to or need to wait until you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s to get these documents in place. You need to have these in place at any age in order to protect yourself from all the what ifs that could happen in life. But as you're contemplating long-term care, it's especially important to make sure that you have some critical legal documents in place, including a durable power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, advance directives, and a will or trust. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of those. So first, an advance directive. An advance directive it can also be known as a living will, allows you to spell out your medical wishes in a legal document. It says, for example, if I'm at end of life, do I want extreme measures to be taken? Do I want artificial nutrition, artificial hydration? Do I want a ventilator to breathe for me? All of those kinds of potential medical interventions that can be put in place. And your advance directive, you can spell out whether or not you would want that. Do you want to be resuscitated? And you can spell out the parameters under which you would want those types of interventions put in place. When we're thinking about long-term care, presumably you have some health conditions, right, that necessitate the need for long-term care. So it's really important to have these documents in place so that your care team knows what you want, knows your wishes, knows what's important to you. You go to the hospital. If you do not want to be resuscitated, if you don't want to be kept alive on life support, your advance directive tells your medical team that's your wishes. So they're very powerful documents. At our organization, we serve as power of attorney for folks. And I can't tell you what a gift it is to have the advance directive in place, because it takes the guesswork out of it. And with families, it reduces guilt. You know, if a family member is making these decisions, they may not know, what would mom or dad have wanted me to do in this situation? With an advance directive in place, you're communicating that to them in advance. And it helps cut down on conflict among family members who might disagree. So it's very important to have this in place, again, at any age, but certainly when you start looking at needing long-term care. A power of attorney is another critical document that you want to have in place. And there's a couple different kinds of power of attorneys. There's a durable power of attorney or a financial power of attorney. I sort of can use those terms interchangeably. And this allows you to appoint somebody called your agent who can manage your money and your property if you're not able to. So if you become incapacitated due to illness, due to dementia, the agent that you have named in your power of attorney, when you still have capacity to do that, can do things like sell real estate on your behalf. Let's say that you have some real estate and the proceeds from that are going to go to pay for your care. If you're incapacitated, you don't have the legal ability to enter into a contract to sell real estate. So you need to have a power of attorney who can do that. A power of attorney to sign contracts, admissions agreements when you're moving into long-term care, and have the ability to access your money to pay for it. So it's a very important document to have in place in terms of managing all of these associated cost and insurance programs related to paying for long-term care. A healthcare power of attorney operates in the same way, but instead of being related to finances, it's related to who can direct your healthcare. So, excuse me, you could have a living will that basically gives your instructions. The healthcare power of attorney, it names somebody who carries out those instructions and who makes day-to-day decisions on your behalf, who attends care plan meetings if you need long-term care, and talks to the care team at the facility to make sure that your care needs are being handled appropriately and according to your wishes. So there's both the financial and the healthcare, and they're both equally as important to have. As I said, it gives you a voice when you otherwise may not have one. It can help reduce family conflict, again, because you've made your wishes known when you were able to communicate them. And without these documents, your family may have to go to court for guardianship. And we're going to talk about why that is not a desirable option in just a moment. Okay. So what about a trust? We could do an entire hour-long presentation just on trust alone. So I am just hitting the highlights of this topic and all of these topics, to be quite honest. A trust is a tool that you can use to protect assets. And there's lots of incentives for why you would want a trust. One incentive is that if your assets are held in trust, then you potentially bypass probate when you pass away and your assets go directly to your beneficiaries. Another advantage to having a trust is that the assets in the trust are managed by whoever you name as trustee. So it kind of has a similar function as a power of attorney in that regard. But one of the primary reasons that folks use a trust in terms of planning for long-term care is for Medicaid planning purposes. If the trust is irrevocable, which means that, once you've created it and once you've put assets in it, you can't change your mind at that point, then the assets in that trust are typically considered exempt for Medicaid planning purposes. The penalty period, for the most part, still applies. So this is a planning mechanism that you need to do in advance, but it is a way to shelter assets and still qualify for Medicaid down the road. And rely on a trustee who then manages and administers the trust and pays for your needs if and when you need long-term care. So trust can be a really helpful financial tool in order to pay for long-term care and still qualify for public benefits. And I mentioned guardianship. So let's say you didn't do any of this legal work up front. You didn't do an advance directive. You did not name anybody as your financial or your healthcare power of attorney. You did not create a trust. And you need long-term care and you're incapacitated. You have dementia and you can't make decisions for yourself. At that point, if you've done no planning in advance, then guardianship becomes the option of last resort. It's truly a safety net that allows someone who's become incapacitated to have an individual appointed to make important life decisions for them. So under a guardianship, you're subject to the court. This is a court process, so it's no longer an individual contract. Under a power of attorney, I get to decide who I name as my agent. Under a guardianship, the court decides who's going to make decisions for me. This process takes time. Anything that goes through the courts takes time. It's expensive because lawyers are involved. There's fees involved. And it puts your personal information into public record. So it is not the ideal option. It takes the individual out of the driver's seat and puts the court in the driver's seat, and nobody wants that to happen, which is why proper legal planning and considering some of these legal tools well in advance is so important. So to summarize some of the financial and legal steps that we've talked about thus far. So we talked about how expensive it is to pay for long-term care. So you want to contemplate that, estimating your cost. Should I need long-term care in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and how much that might cost? And then understanding your own personal financial situation. Have you planned for this? Do you have retirement? Do you have investments and assets that will allow you to pay for those costs? Do you have these important legal documents in place that we've talked about to help make sure that even if you have those savings, that there's somebody who's able to utilize them on your behalf should you need care? Have you explored long-term care insurance? Ideally, like I said, you would get that policy when you're younger and when you're healthier, because it's going to be more affordable at that point. If you don't have that and you don't have any savings, understanding Medicaid, knowing how it works, knowing what the eligibility criteria is for the different programs. And then lastly, and this is so important, talking with your family. Letting your family, loved ones know what your wishes are. The more you communicate what your wishes are, the more likely they're going to be honored. Okay, so we're down to our last 15 minutes. And so I want to take some time to answer some of the questions that were submitted in advance. And then if we have any time left over, we can answer additional questions at that point. So the first question that was submitted, and gosh, this is a great question. Is there an option for those needing long-term care but who fall through the cracks? And what I suspect this person was referring to is this tremendous cavernous gap in the North Carolina long-term care system. So remember I talked about the average cost of assisted living is close to $6,000 a month in North Carolina. The special assistance income limit is about $1,450 a month in North Carolina. So you can already see where the gap comes from, right? Let's say you make $2,000 a month in income and you need assisted living, but the average assisted living is $6,000. Who makes up that difference? You don't qualify for special assistance. You don't have any assets, so assets are not an issue. You just make too much income to qualify for help. And the government, Social Security Administration, won't let you give income back. You can't opt out and say, you know what, I'd rather not make $2,000 a month. Can we reduce this a little bit so that I can get help paying for care? It doesn't work that way. So there is a huge gap in our system for people who make just a little bit too much money to qualify for special assistance, but not enough to pay privately. I wish I had the magic answer to this dilemma. I can't tell you how much time and energy I spend advocating for clients who fall into this gap. It is such a problem. Some possible solutions to this gap: smaller adult care homes, family care homes, mom and pop assisted livings, if you will, sometimes are more flexible in their pricing and tend to be a bit more affordable than your larger assisted living facilities. You might ask about move-in specials, discounts. If you're willing to share a room, that tends to be more affordable than a private room. Some assisted livings, and they're getting fewer and far between, will accept somebody at the special assistance rates if they make just a little too much money to qualify. So it's worth asking the question. Reach out to your local area agency on aging, your ombudsman, because they often are familiar with the homes that will work with people based on their incomes and can make some suggestions. Again, none of these are the perfect answer. Here's what you do when you're in this situation. I wish that there was a solution, and this is a huge advocacy need to fill that gap in our state. Okay, somebody wants to know, how do you budget for long-term care? Well, you create a budget for long-term care just like anything else. You assess your care needs. You know, if you're looking at right now, you know, what care needs do I have right now? But ideally, you're projecting into the future, right? And so you might look at what kind of shape am I in now? What chronic health conditions do I have now? What runs in my family? You know, if my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents all had Alzheimer's disease, then, you know, there's a genetic component there. I might contemplate, you know, the odds are I might need memory care at some point in my life. So assessing your own situation, again, looking at the care cost in your area, knowing what you have, what is your income, what is your assets, and having that all written down. And then it becomes a math problem from there of, do I have the money to pay privately, and for how long until there's going to be a shortfall? And if you identify that there's going to be a shortfall, then you might want to start doing some of this planning in advance to help fill that gap. And you want to look at this budget just like any other budget, your household budget. You want to look at it on a regular basis as circumstances change. This is a great question. Could entering a CCRC help mitigate the cost of long-term care? And for those of you who may not be familiar, a CCRC is a continuing care retirement community. And this is an option, a type of retirement option that offers all levels of care on one campus. So you move in at the independent living level of care. Many of them have cottages, they have apartments. And then if you need assisted living, that's offered on that campus. And then if you need nursing home, that's also offered on that campus. CCRCs tend to be your more upscale retirement options. They tend to be, some of them have golf courses and pools and, tend to be very desirable for folks. There's some pros and there's some potential cons to a CCRC. The pros, the costs tend to be laid out for you upon signing in or buying into the community. So the costs tend to be a little bit more predictable than if you move into a standalone assisted living, who could increase their costs, quite a bit in a very unpredictable way. Another plus, and this is a big plus, is the continuum of care on one location. You can have your care on the same campus from independence all the way through end of life, and that gives a lot of peace of mind. The quality of care at CCRCs tends to be higher. That's not a blanket statement across the board, but generally speaking, it tends to be a high quality of care. And another plus for a CCRC is that many of them have a benevolent fund. It's funded with donations. It could be endowment funding that is used for somebody who's moved into the campus and outlives their resources. Not all CCRCs have this, but many of them do, and that's certainly a plus. Some of the potential drawbacks, however, or barriers, I should say, not necessarily drawbacks, some barriers is the upfront cost. So in order to enter a CCRC, you're typically required to pay a buy-in fee or an entrance fee. And that can be upwards of $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. Some places across the country, it's closer to $1 million. So you need to have a substantial amount of money available to you up front in order to have this option. If you don't have that money, then it's typically not an option that is available to you. Another potential barrier is that not all CCRCs accept public benefits. So should you need Medicaid down the road, many CCRCs do not accept Medicaid. Limited refundability on that large upfront fee. It depends. It varies dramatically from community to community, but you might be out some money, that large outlay of cash, should you not live there for 10, 20 years as originally intended. And then certainly the financial risk if you outlive your assets, if the community does not have a benevolent fund that you're able to access. So the answer to the question, could entering a CCRC help mitigate the cost of long-term care? It's a resounding maybe. It depends on your financial situation. But it's a wonderful option for folks who have the resources to pay that upfront cost. Select a long-term care facility. Well, if you're looking at right now, if you need, you or a loved one or someone you work with needs long-term care, you first want to look at their needs, because that's going to limit your search. If this is somebody who needs a nursing home, you don't want to look at assisted livings. So know the person's medical needs, talk to their physician, understand what kind of care do they need. Do they just need help with, reminders to take their medicines? Maybe they're just not able to prepare meals for themselves. They need some housekeeping support. Then that's somebody who needs assisted living. If they need hands-on medical care and support with all of their activities of daily living, then you're looking in the direction of a nursing home. So you want to know what level of care first and foremost that you're looking at, because that's going to narrow your search down dramatically. And then you want to know your budget. Finances, as we've discussed throughout this presentation, really dictate the options that are available to you. You don't want to spend your time touring continuing care retirement communities if you don't have the money to pay that upfront fee, because you're going to be disappointed after the fact when you don't have the funds to move in. So if you know you're reliant on Medicaid, then you want to only look at long-term care facilities that accept Medicaid. That's going to narrow your search down even further. All long-term care facilities will accept private pay. So if you have the financial resources, that opens up your net a little bit wider. But if budget constraints are a reality, then you want to look at only the facilities that are gonna meet your budget. Then you want to research the quality of the facilities that are still on your list. For nursing homes, there is a lot of public information available on Medicare.gov. There's a tool called Nursing Home Compare, where you can look up the star ratings of a nursing facility that's based on multiple criteria, but you can look at their inspection results and make a much more informed decision based on that information rather than just sort of blindly choosing a nursing home. For assisted livings, you have to dig a little deeper to find that information, but it is still out there. The North Carolina Division of Health Service Regulation has a website where you can access a star ratings for assisted livings. And it's also based on the regulatory visits that are made. So do some research, make sure that you are going in with your eyes wide open. Ask around. I always encourage folks, if you go to church, 9 times out of 10, there's going to be somebody in your church who has an experience with a particular facility, or if you're working, ask your coworkers. And word of mouth is really a great way to help narrow your search down. And then lastly, and there's no substitution for this, you want to visit. You want to take the tour that is led by whoever their salesperson is, their admissions person, and then you want to pop in and do another visit where they don't know that you're coming. Maybe you pop in on the weekends, or even, we just had Memorial Day, pop in on a holiday, so that you really get a good scope of what day-to-day life is like in that community. So what if you've moved into a long-term care facility and you have concerns? And a few of these questions, somebody mentioned some concerns about staff not being responsive to a resident council or a family council. Or there were some questions about being discharged inappropriately. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is a wonderful resource that is available to address concerns about care, and it runs the gamut. It can be concerns about cold coffee. I get coffee every day and it's cold and I want hot coffee, all the way to, poor care, neglect, some much more substantial care issues, and then everything in between. Ombudsmen are responsible for advocating for residents' rights, and they can be a wonderful resource for residents and their families and professionals in navigating how to express a concern about care and getting some results. And the program is free of charge. There's no cost associated with it. To find the ombudsman in your area, you can go to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website, Google ombudsman. There's an ombudsman for all 100 counties in North Carolina. What legal and financial issues are common across states? There's a lot of similarities in everything that we've talked about today if you're looking at long-term care in another state, but there are some differences. Medicaid is a federal state partnership, so the way that it's administered and some of the eligibility guidelines are going to look different in South Carolina compared to North Carolina. Same thing goes for those legal documents that we talked about. Each state can have their own forms that they would like you to use if you're naming somebody as your agent under a power of attorney. So you want to make sure you use state-specific forms. And then long-term care is regulated differently from state to state. And so you want to know what the regulatory rules are in your state. But regardless of what state, proactive planning is universal. You need to do it wherever you live. How can I advocate for public policies to improve long-term care? There's tons of advocacy opportunities. If you watch the news, you know that the Medicaid's at risk. Lots and lots of opportunities for advocacy. Contact your legislators, volunteer, join Friends of Residents in Long-Term Care. And if Kay hasn't put the link in the chat, I'm sure she will. Make a donation to Friends of Residents. As Kay mentioned, we do a lot of advocacy work, state and federal, to advocate for policies that are friendly to long-term care residents or people who are planning for long-term care. And then lastly, if you want to learn more about legal documents, estate planning, other legal considerations in planning for long-term care, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys website has a directory where you can find an elder law attorney in your area. Same thing for a financial planner. You can go to the Certified Financial Planners website and find one in your area. And I'm losing my voice just in time to wrap up. For long-term care insurance, you can go to the American Association for Long-Term Care Insurance website and find a specialist in your area. All right.
That was
We're done.
great. Thank you so much. Such great information. We did have one question you might be able to answer quickly, but is the amount for in-home care for around-the-clock care?
Around the clock care in the home for Medicaid? That, unless you qualify under one of the Medicaid waiver programs, which is targeted specifically for people with severe disabilities, you're not going to get around the clock care covered by Medicaid. People who qualify for community-based Medicaid qualify for some in-home care. It's usually a handful of hours per week. But if you need around the clock care, for example, if you're at the assisted living level of care, or even at the nursing home level of care, as an older adult, unless you qualify for one of the Medicaid waivers for people with disabilities, it doesn't provide it, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And then just a couple thank yous in the chat for the information today. And so we've got links in the chat. We linked to Friends of Residents website and to Guidance Carolina's website if you'd like more information about that. And we'll send a follow-up in the next couple days. But thank you so much, Dorian, for presenting this information to us today. I know a lot of people are taking some good nuggets of information away, and we hope to see everyone. We hope to do these events more regularly and hope to see you at the next one. So thanks everyone and have a great afternoon.